Hello, everybody, and welcome into this week's 30 Minutes program. We're talking with the superintendent of Weakley County Schools, Jeff Cupples. One of the things that we've been paying attention to closely across the state of Tennessee is the subject of vouchers and how that affects local schools. Tell us what vouchers mean to Weakley County schools now.
Vouchers, you probably said it right there. It's a hot topic across the state, has been for a while now. If you've kept up with the news, just recently it did pass in our Tennessee legislature and will take effect in school year 25-26. So, as a resident of Weakley County, as a taxpayer and as a superintendent and as a parent with kids in our schools, I've asked myself that question quite a bit, Paul, as far as what do vouchers mean for Weakley County. And, on the front end, I really thought, at least with the way the bill was written last year, that we would potentially be buffered a little bit from the effects, at least any immediate effects. But currently, as it's written, there's some things in there that are concerning. And of course, first and foremost, you just take education out of it and just look at it as a bill from a financial standpoint. And I know there's fiscal committees in Nashville that have looked at it, and I've not got it memorized word for word, but just reading through the fiscal note attached to this bill, it's going to be very expensive for Weakley County. As you know, one thing that's come out as a talking point is somewhere around 41, 42, something like that, counties have private schools that are eligible for the voucher, but all 95 counties will be paying taxes to cover those scholarships, as they call it, which I think that's an interesting note. There's been some conversation that I've heard that, it's not a voucher, it's a scholarship. Bottom line is you apply to the state gives you public tax dollars to go to a private school, and we as taxpayers now will be paying for that all across the state. And then the other thing that's concerning about it for Weakley County is not only is the cost there, but it's going to be a cost out the door, but it's also going to be a restriction on revenue for us. I think it's going to put more pressure on our local funding body with our county commission. Again, you read through the fiscal note, which I don't think probably has made it out there in public as much, and you can see it on the General Assembly website, but it point blank says in 25 or starting in 26, there will be a $50 million reduction in revenue to TISA.
What is TISA?
TISA is a Student Succeed Act or something like that. I forget it off the top of my head, but TISA is how we're funded. It replaced the OBEP, the Basic Education Program. And so TISA, started in 2023, and it's the new way that they fund public schools, which the state constitution says you have to do. Of course, the faith in me says, you can't serve two masters. So now I feel like we are pulling public tax dollars, and now we're, in essence, trying to fund a public school plus fund at least partially private school with these scholarships. And to the point to where our county commission, I feel like, is going to feel a pinch. As far as here locally, is if we get less TISA dollars from the state, which their own fiscal study says that's going to happen, then it comes to our county commission from a local standpoint. Do they fill the gap and support our schools? And if they don't, then you're looking at a reduction in services. And you can say, well, Jeff, what does that mean? That means, potentially, do we cut programs? Do we not keep things updated and current as much? And ultimately, do we cut people? Which nobody wants to hear that. And I'm certainly not thinking that. But when you look at the fiscal note, and it says repeatedly from here on out, revenue is going to go down because the money's going back over to private now. I mean, I think that does have I can't, look at a crystal ball and tell you exactly how it's going to affect our county, but just reading their own literature, it doesn't look very good. When
will the facts be known?
It's not attendance now with the OBEP that had a little bit bigger play in it, but what the acronym you'll hear now is ADM, which is average daily membership as opposed to attendance, which means enrollment, basically names on a roster. So, with flu season going around, if we have a student that's absent because they're out with the flu, that doesn't affect our funding now. It's all based on ADM because they're still enrolled with that Weakley County schools at a particular campus. So
if you have 4,000 students, as you do right now, and if that's your number, you may get a couple of students to come in the middle of the school year or something to that effect, and then you'd say you have 4,002, you'd get a little bit more money from them.
Right now,
how much does a student mean to the county?
Well, depends on the what the state calls the unique learning needs of that student. But if you use the term, because the term in the TISA formula is base. So if you have a base student that comes in, we right now currently in the budget we receive $7,075 for that student. So and then that number is multiplied by our ADM, which goes up and down. They pull it periodically. Families are just more transient. It was leaning that way anyway, but definitely since COVID, it seems like families are more transient. So our numbers will go up and down. We've been over 4,000 this year. I think right now we're like 3,993 last I checked. But whatever that number is, it's multiplied times that $7,075, and that's how you get your base.
Almost $300,000.
As far as
total dollars coming in.
From TISA, we typically will get, right now I think we're around 20, well, right now I think we're right at 30 million state dollars.
Okay.
And then, but then part of that is, let's say if a student, let's say we're trying to, educate a student best with severe disabilities. So based on the needs of that student, there's weights inside this formula that the state will apply, based on the testing of the student. And
so the child may need two parents,
right.
Two teachers is what I guess.
So let's say if they've got, let's just say in the most severe cases, if a student needs an aide with them during the day. We've seen that from time to time. We have some that require that now. But the bottom line is in that TISA formula, you get the $7,075 times that student will get 150%. So you're going to get well over that, for that student to help the county offset the cost, to supply the needs that child needs to learn. And so, and that's another thing, I guess, Paul, that really hits me down to the core is the propaganda around this thing is, this is school choice or parent choice. It's not. I know this has been a talking point, and I know some people are disagree with me, but I've got friends that work in private school, and the bottom line is, if I apply for the voucher or what they call the scholarship, and I go to a private school and I try to enroll, I can be denied. So it's actually private school choice. They can turn me away.
What about Christian schools?
They can turn you away. So you go back to a student who has severe disabilities, there is no requirement on a private school to accept students regardless of need, even though they're now accepting public tax dollars. And that I've got a real problem with that, because we educate all of them. We do it to the best of our ability, and most of your public schools across the state, I say most, they all do that. The accountability is much higher on our end. I don't know. It frustrates me. And I've got friends that are superintendents, and, many of them have students, their own kids that they know would be potentially turned away in that area. And I just, have a problem with that. I got to, as a public school, my whole career has been in public school. So obviously I'm looking at it from that perspective. But the other issue there is the accountability piece. If you've read much on this, I think there's language in the law where a private school will have to test a private school student if a kid goes in with a scholarship. But all they have to do, they report that to the comptroller's office. There's no school report card. There's no public posting of how that school's doing and how those students are doing, which is completely opposite what we do with public school, where our numbers get published publicly every year. And so, again, the coach in me has a problem with that, because if I'm going to play, I want to all play by the same rules. If you're accepting public tax dollars. And now I think I told Skylar this on an interview earlier. In my mind, the way I look at this is, if I build a house, I don't ask for public tax dollars to pave my private driveway. I'm responsible for that myself. Public tax dollars goes towards public highways, not private driveways. And so, the state constitution says you've got to have a public school system. It doesn't say anything about private schools. So, of course, I've got a best friend, he looks at it differently. He's like, well, I'm a taxpayer. I should get that money. So I understand the arguments behind it, but I think what most school systems, really key in on is the fact that it's not level playing fields. The accountability is there on the public school side. It's not there on the private school side. Now, internally, they may have controls, but the state's not putting anything extra on them, even though they're now giving tax dollars.
Superintendent Mr. Cupples is talking with us about vouchers and how they will affect Weakley County's school system. Is there anything that goes along with this $7,300 based on what you know? And again, you're on the public side of it, and then there's the private side of it. That money, that $7,300 that comes in, is it paid in a lump sum? If you know, and if you don't, that's okay.
Well, the way it reads right now, and I do feel better about this particular language. It does say that the first priority for that fund is it has to go towards tuition for that private school. But if all the money is not used in the tuition, then it can be used for any number of things. I mean, it's listing uniforms, textbooks. I think as long as it's school related, let me back up on that. As long as the argument can be made that it's school related, it can be spent on that. But I do.
What do you mean by school related? Well, based on what you
know.
Well,
like last year, for example, I know that bill got defeated, but there was a big concern going around, like how do you police where that money goes? And let's just say a parent or a family were to say, we want to get a big screen television. But if you call that a monitor or a presentation board, because if you go into a public classroom, you're going to have a 70-inch screen in every room for learning boards. And of course, they're much more than just a TV, but you could buy something like that and call that a monitor. That was an example I saw that's happening in several states that are going with this. And next thing you know, public tax dollars are putting 70-inch televisions in the living rooms of homes, as opposed to in the classroom. And that's another thing, Paul, when you look at this bill, is the own fiscal note says they're predicting 65% of the people who receive this public tax dollars are students who are already in private school.
So what happens to the $7,300? It's sent to the school, and they can do whatever they want to, or they can continue to charge a certain amount of money.
Sure.
And then that, with the $7,300, it will go toward education.
Right. The vast majority, at least the studies they've looked at, the majority of your private schools that are in those 41-ish counties, I don't remember the exact number, but $7,000 or $7,075 or whatever the final number ends up being from year to year, it's probably not going to cover the tuition at those schools.
What is the average in Jackson? We'll use. What's the average?
I don't want to speak to that, Paul. I mean, I would throw out a random number of 15,000, but I don't know that for sure. As far as JCS, TCA, USJ, be your big three there. But I know I've got a friend that basically does my job in the private school world here in the state, and their school's tuition, they're not in Jackson, but it's 21,000. So it's still 3 times over what the voucher would be. But the way that works, from what I understand, this is another frustrating. I'm a history major at heart, and so what goes around comes around. History repeats itself. All the little cliches you hear a lot. If you don't learn from it, it does happen. And, I guess one of the more disappointing things that I saw is we've now paid out a massive amount of money in a contract with the same software platform that Arkansas used in their rollout of school vouchers. And I remember reading several articles, like everything else, the algorithm's tracking what you're looking at. So now, on my phone, since I paid attention to that, the algorithm is sending me links all the time of newspaper articles, which is, it's a good thing. I'm reading those. But I've read several about Arkansas where they can't track the money. And again, I don't want to get off and talk about things that I don't know facts about, but I believe the original platform that they used was eventually let go and fired, for lack of a better word. And then I read that we've picked up the same one that Arkansas used. So the history in me, I'm like, why are we using the same one if it's already proven not to be able to track the money? Right now on the national level, if you've kept up with the news, President Trump is tracking money hard
yeah,
right now.
And the Department of Education may not be here by
right.
the time this interview is on.
Well, from what I understand, last night during the Super Bowl, it got officially. I don't know how true that is, but I saw that pop up.
How do you feel about that? Would you prefer to have Tennessee taking care of its own students, Weakley County taking care of their students, as opposed to somebody in Washington telling you got to do this just like everybody else does?
You know, I don't mind saying publicly I'm a very conservative person, and I do believe we need to know where our money's going. And if that means it needs to be closer to home in order for us to do that, and that money comes to Tennessee, you know, when you talk about the abolishment of the Department of Education on a national level, you know, the first thought that I have about that is our federal dollars, you know, and you know, and I'm going to use a base number of roughly, say, 10% of our budget is federal dollars, and that's mainly our title dollars. As you know, Paul,
tell them what title is.
Well, title are just federal programs that pay to make sure mainly that you are able to provide a FAPE, free and appropriate education to all students. So when you look at Title I, for example, which is normally associated, you know, with poverty and lower income families, Title I, if you qualify, if I think it's like maybe 40%, again, I have to go back and look at those numbers, but all of our schools qualify for Title I, which means we receive Title I dollars from the federal government that goes towards those schools. If we lose that, that's a chunk. And then if you look, and then you zoom back in on the state level and you look at the actual bill says, the fiscal note attached to this bill says we're going to lose $50 million in TISA the next year. You know, and again, you know, I'd like to think and pray that our county commission wouldn't do this, but, you know, it would be an option they would look at. Let's say we were to eventually begin losing students because of this bill or this law now. And there's a component where our county commission can go in and they can cut our funding locally. So now at all three levels, we're being cut. And, you know, that's going to make it hard to do what we've done in the past. And one thing, Paul, that I've said a few times, and people can argue with me on this, and it's entirely up to them. But, you know, I guess I'm personally laying claim to the title, #1 public rural school system in the state. When you look at our academic performance across TCAP and ELCs, when I look at those numbers, I mean, we're in the higher echelon of those in just about every category. Now, obviously, we've got areas we've got to work on, like every school system. But, you know, when I look at us being a rural county school system that has title schools, I think what we're doing academically is amazing. What our schools are doing, what our teachers are doing, what all of our support staff is pulling off. But to continue that service so that the people of Weakley County can send their kids to good schools and know that they're going to get an education, that gets harder to do if you're getting cut at all three levels of funding. So some of this is going to be a sit back and wait and see to how it all plays out. I don't want to be all doom and gloom, and you know, hopefully some good things will come out of this. But it's their own note says 65% of the kids that's going to take this money are already in private schools. So this is not a deal where students have an opportunity to get out of a failing school. You know, now that we have report cards, you know, an F school and jump into a successful school and have a change of environment and maybe a reset and a new beginning. That's not what this bill is about. Their own bill's already said that 65% of the kids will already be in private school.
You've just joined us. We're talking with the Superintendent, Director of Schools, Jeff Cupples. We're on a kind of a recap of vouchers, but I'd like to move forward for just a moment.
Sure.
First off, I have a personal matter that deals with Weakley County because I care greatly about special needs children. And I know that is perhaps one of the more challenging positions that a teacher can agree to accept. Tell me how special education is how is it today? How is it in Weakley County? How is it in Sharon? Because isn't that where most of the students are there?
Yeah, especially when you look at the earlier grades, if you ask me, how is special education in Weakley County? Well, I can tell you this. Back, this past year when the state put out the county profiles, and they rank, any number of metrics for each county, and then they put all that in a profile for that county. Well, that's where, the State Department came out and said Tennessee was Weakley County was sixth in Tennessee in education. Of course, we had that on the billboards. We're proud of that. Again, one of the reasons I feel like we can say we're the number one rural county system in Tennessee. But if you dive into that report and you look a little bit deeper, it does talk about special education, Paul, and we are also the sixth ranked special education program. So how is it in Weakley County? It's doing really well. There are a lot of challenges, obviously, and when you look at our schools, a lot of our early grades, they do end up going to sharing if the team decides that. When you look at a student who qualifies for services because of a disability, there's a team that's involved in that decision. It's not just the school's decision. It's not just the parent's decision. We bring everybody to the table in what's called an IEP team. And when you look at sharing, one of the frustrating things that I have, just me personally, is I look at that school, and when you visit the school, you don't know till you go visit. And, coming up, we have a HEED committee. We're going to meet at Sharon School, and I'm excited for the HEED committee members, health economics or health education economics development commission, county commission members that are on that committee get to see what happens at Sharon on a daily basis. It's amazing the progress. I won't say his name, but there's a student there who was nonverbal, and now he's making morning announcements. And to see that kind of success. TCAP doesn't measure that, and of course doesn't measure that. You just have to be there to see those kind of personal victories. And but also once they move past, they also go to Martin Middle School and then on to Westview. So they do eventually move to other schools as well.
Before we wrap up here today with Mr. Cupples, I want to ask you to maybe look at this from a different point of view, but you are losing a teacher who has given pretty much 49 years of their life. And it's hard to replace someone that has been in education that long. But the other part of it is you probably have had some of the most incredible students that have gone out and become band directors. And you're losing a gentleman who I know you have great respect for, Mike Tucker, who is resigning at the end of this school year. And it's no secret, but your wife, as I understand, is going to succeed him. But Mike Tucker was on the radio with us this past Saturday on Coach's Corner. And just knowing him for a long time, 35 years, whatever it has been, that's the hardest working man I think I've ever seen when it comes to what he does.
Just a quick story, Paul, about a band, and I think this definitely holds true for Mr. Tucker as well. When my wife and I, of course, I get asked a lot of times, how did a head football coach and a head band director get married? How did our worlds collide other than on a field on Friday night?
Divine intervention.
That's right. It was. Lord told me plain as day she was one I was supposed to marry, and got a great testimony around that. But to that effect, there was a point, maybe my first or second year as a head coach, and there was I can't remember what had happened. There was an oil leak maybe down around the Gulf. Anyway, petroleum prices were skyrocketing, and long story short, helmet prices were going up incredibly. And I came home one afternoon and one night during the off season working on a budget, and I was just furious because I was going to have to pay $300 for a helmet.
That's the going price.
Yeah, and my wife looked at me and said, "Try paying $3,000, $5,000, $6,000 for an instrument." And that's when I realized I got a healthy respect for band and the work that it takes. All facets, and they work just as hard as our head coaches in any sport. And and for Mr. Tucker to be dealing with price increases and students and all the things that go in to running a program for 48 years, that's a life that when you finally get to lay your head down and sleep, you can say I've made an impact. And it's not about finances; it's about the lives you changed And, the commitment to continue to do that level of work, called him the hardest working people. It's so true. He's up there all the time
and trying to get a trip to Washington
and trying to get experiences for our kids. It's just a lot. And so, the most respect and appreciation for him. But again, we say all the time, we interview new teachers. It's not about, it has to be a calling. You can't just be doing it for a job. And I think when you've done it as long as Mr. Tucker has, I think he's answered the call.
You are at a point now where the dust has kind of settled on the vouchers. The next step of education is going to be where will you see it? Because we're talking about TSSAA moving students around, moving football, basketball players. You've got a handle on that. Let's hear it.
Well, as far as the next step, I guess I can only say maybe what I've said in a couple of the meetings with our principals is, I've said before, if the voucher thing passes, and of course that's a year old now, and now we've moved forward and it has passed, I've said, we as a public school system, we have traditionally, we've opened our doors and we educate whoever comes in. And you've been locked in on these zones, right? And so along the way, you've seen an evolution there where we, like in our own county, we have open enrollment. You could talk about school choice. You got school choice in our county. We have open enrollment in the county. There's even some bills to like erase all zone lines, where you got open enrollment all the way across the state. I know TSSAA has been considered a barrier to that because listening to the coaches and athletic directors and principals, we don't want a free agency or an NIL type atmosphere in high school athletics, which things do tend to trickle down. So to see the 12-0 vote by the Board of Control by TSSAA for me was encouraging. I do like to move forward, look forward, and think out of the box, but some things just aren't good. And it's like with this voucher, some things just aren't good for our state. And I'm talking more financially than anything. But the things I've told our principals as far as moving forward is, just sitting back. Now that enrollment is tied to funding, we're going to have to be very aggressive and innovative, not only in the services we provide, but also as far as just advertising, simple things like that. Because now, how many kids you have in class depends on how much money you have to operate on. And I know the people in this county want and deserve a good education for their children. And like I said, as a parent, I want the same thing. And so I think we're just going to have to be out of the box and not just kind of wait and see who comes through the door. We're going to have to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of the services that we deliver.
Sports has become a very big deal, as we had talked about just then, but at some point, kids are going to be encouraged to go to another school because you can get $500 or $5,000 or whatever that figure may happen to be. And the NIL is going to trickle down as deep as it can go. And you never know what kind of football program or basketball or volleyball or whatever sport it happens to be. You're not going to know what you're going to get sometimes if it moves across the line.
Right. Yeah, it's, kind of like, again, with the national level stuff going on right now, you got to follow the dollar. I don't ever want to get in a point, just me personally, Paul, where I'm making business decisions on the products that I buy or services that I use based on the recommend. Just because as much as I admired watching Michael Jordan, that didn't make me eat Wheaties. And so I hope we never get to the point where we're paying high school kids to advertise for products. But if you just look at the way things have gone, I know that's where we're heading, but I'm not going to go there willingly, I guess.
Thank you, sir. Enjoyed our visit today. Jeff Cupples, he's the Director of Schools in Weakley County. All Tinkle, re-recorded.
You've been listening to 30 Minutes, a community affairs program on Thunderbolt Radio. You can listen to this broadcast and others anytime by visiting thunderboltradio.com and following the Thunderbolt Radio and Digital YouTube page. Thanks for listening.